So we get to the part about music in Elizabethan England. And Durant made the point earlier that the milk of human kindness had for the most part dried up in the country during that time. And yet we have got a very prominent music scene, not one that's up on stages so much as the scene is in the home. Everyone was a musician, it seemed like. You could walk into a barber shop and expect to pick up an instrument and play while you were waiting for your haircut or whatever people were having done back then. So, how do you go from a period where people are just bursting with music to a place today where everything seems to be mediated? I think one of the answers is certainly the Puritans and their efforts to clamp down on anything which they saw as less than pious. So they still had some music, but it was much more dignified and formal and kind of stuck to the central tenets of biblical truth. Most of the music, it says in Durant's chapter here during this time period, was secular. There were Catholic compositions, but they tended to be performed more in private. And then, of course, there were some in the Anglican Church, as will come later with the Book of Common Prayer, Anglican Church not yet in existence at this point. But with the Puritans, they had hymns and so forth. Another factor would be the advent of electricity, as wonderful as it is, which it is. Otherwise, I'd be filming here in the dark. But you think about that, with the ability to have these wonderful musicians on tap whenever we want, through headphones, in our car, wherever, through speakers both connected with wires and wireless. I mean, we've got it all at our fingertips. Who needs to sing these days? Who needs to play the piano when you can call up on Google Play or Pandora any major masterpiece of Western classical music, or even more creative stuff? It's all there, and it's all available at the simply at the press of the play button. Whereas back then, if you were going to have music, you're going to have to play that music or be in proximity of somebody who can. So the Puritans, the rise of power, to go with a P alliteration in our organizational structure, those two over time put a damper on this explosion of wonderful music, homemade music that we saw in Elizabethan England. It was taught, and I remember taking music class in school, but they taught it back then too, and maybe even more seriously. I had a horrible, my third grade music teacher is the one that forced me to play the flutophone, which I probably knew where it was about half the time in my life when I was in the class. She threatened to string me up by my toes with piano wire. I don't think that would pass today's standards of ethical teacher behavior, but yeah, I considered that threat semi-real and probably played a little bit better on my flutophone. But that and singing The Old Gray Goose is Dead in the second grade, was in Kansas at that point. So I remember music. In fact, I was in the ensemble. I actually was kind of musical. I sang in choirs and all that stuff. So, but today, what's my excuse now? I can sing. I can sing, the bass part in hundreds of hymns. I do know all that stuff and can follow classical music. Sang in the oratorio of Handel's Messiah in college. So I'm just having this revelation now. I hadn't even thought about this of myself as a participating musician, but I'm not at the moment, other than simply as a consumer, but apparently I have been in the past, simply by thinking through what I've done. Well, let's see, what else have we got here in terms of music in this period? I wish that I could put some music here in this video, but for copyright reasons, I'm going to avoid that. But I'm going to give you simply 5 names that I'll list here in the video. And what I'll do in the comment section below here on YouTube is put links to YouTube videos featuring the music of those Elizabethan era composers. The first one is William Byrd. Second, Orlando Gibbons. Third, John Bull. Fourth, John Dowland. And number 5, Thomas Campion. So I think I should be able to find music for all of those. It says that instruments, they had a variety of instruments, but the lute was the one that was most likely to be played as a virtuoso performance. Today I think of the electric guitar, the guitar solo, which would take prominence, but back then the lute was king. Now, there was also the virginal, which was a forerunner of the piano. It was a rectangular box, had like 1 string per note or something. One of these days I want to record some of these music videos within a music studio where somebody can actually lead us through key terms such as counterpoint, which talked about the madrigal, which was a musical form back then, that talked about love in counterpoint. And from there, Webster's Third Unabridged Dictionary, with a $20 bill as my bookmark. I had to put the cash in there just to be a little more ghetto, since I'm pulling out a dictionary to counterbalance my counterpoint to nerdiness. Anyway, counterpoint. What is it? According to Webster's Dictionary, 3rd edition, it is one or more independent melodies added as an accompaniment to a primary melody, as a cantus firmus. I don't have a cat, but if I did get a cat, which I wouldn't because I would get a dog, but I might name that cat Cantus firmus. So you've got your basic melody that rolls along, the tune that is most recognizable. And then what the composer does is lays a second melody or a second line of music right on top of that, so they kind of sync together. I don't know if you've had the experience listening to classical music, especially Mozart, Beethoven as well, where you can almost visualize the movements of the notes. And I think what I'm visualizing is that action of counterpoint movement. So I got another definition I bookmarked here. And it is fugue. Fugue. There it is. Fugue. Okay. A contrapuntal musical composition in which one or two melodic themes are repeated or imitated by the successively entering voices and developed in a continuous interweaving of the voice parts into a well-defined single structure. So when I think about successively entering voices, I think of the obvious. I think of those scenes that I've seen on National Geographic, the Nile River. You got all these 22-foot crocs just lined up, and there's the poor wildebeest that strays away from the herd and it's floundering around in the water, and you see the first croc go in. That's probably the primary melody in my metaphor here. And then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth. And then they all merge together into this maelstrom, this whirlpool of crocodilian death. That's kind of what a fugue is. And if you listen to Toccata and Fugue in D minor, I think there's some crocodilian notes in there. It's pretty intense. I'm going to admit that I don't know a whole lot about music, but I did find a fascinating Yale series, which I'll link to below, on their open courses. And the instructor, the professor, leads the students over a course of a semester in the history of music from probably the very beginning until contemporary music, and does so with a piano, with musical instruments, with other musicians who come in and play things. So he probably would explain what a counterpoint is and a fugue is, and play those in a way that's understandable. So I also will take advantage of that series at some point. So, I'm going to leave you with one final paragraph here, page 61, where Durant says, fugue and counterpoint, now that we know what those are developed during the Elizabethan period. But no thematic variation, no ingenuity in modulation, no resolved discords or chromatic harmonies. So it's all kind of just flatlined. It's very straight and level. It's your airplane that's on the runway, and it starts the takeoff process and tops out at about 65 miles an hour before turning around and coming back to the terminal. And yet, with our nerves being frayed with the pounding stimuli of modern life, we find something cleansing and healing in Elizabethan music. No bombast, no rasping dissonances, no thundering finales, only the voice of an English youth or girl singing plaintively or merrily the timeless canticles of impeded love. And I'll drink to that. No thundering finales. That was one of the criticisms that I read about one of my favorite musicals, Jekyll and Hyde, which I saw at Purdue University's Elliott Auditorium 2001-ish or so. Lovely musical score, but the songs have been criticized for starting off just very beautifully and slow, but then ending with that amazing crescendo that a great vocalist can bring to the stage. That's wonderful to do, but they just seem to do it a lot. Like a lot of churches, especially some of the big, more traditional mega churches of the past, very often do, where the choir, the orchestra, sometimes the soloist kind of counterbalancing the choir will end on this just magnificent crescendo that's almost predictable. You can almost play the final 3 seconds of all the special music throughout the year, and they will probably sound about the same for those 3 seconds, ending with that final crisp cutoff, and depending on how formal your church is, people either applauding or restraining their applaud. I'm thinking of the Battle Hymn of the Republic that I saw performed at the First Baptist Church of West Palm Beach in Florida when Jack Graham, who's now the pastor of Prestonwood Baptist, large church here in the Dallas area, was originally pastor down there. And I was probably 8th grade or so when I saw it, but you got a large, great choir. There was an orchestra, not a full orchestra because they didn't have room for that, but at least a chamber orchestra, but functional nonetheless. A pipe organ that was bigger than that church really should have been able to hold. It was 120 ranks. Sanctuary seated probably 800 by my calculations. And yes, I did calculate during the sermon. So the Battle Hymn of the Republic starts off, and it's just beautiful. There are parts that just in the middle, they kind of dip down into the lilies and just all that stuff. It's just gorgeous. And then building to that thunderous climax. And at that point, when everything is just breaking loose, the American flag, this huge flag, just rose from behind the choir all the way to the top of the back of the sanctuary. And how could you not feel patriotic? How could you not say that this is a thing? The notion of music upholding the legitimacy of an institution and of a position regarding patriotism. Anyway, that thunderous quality, those grand finales, those musical tools that were so often used by many throughout history to persuade people, ethically and unethically, wasn't really present in Elizabethan music. That again just seemed to plod along in kind of a rural beauty, just an appreciation of the beautiful calmness of life, despite all those hangings and beheadings and all the other things that were going on, the wars with Ireland and France, there was some calm in the center of this storm, and that was Elizabethan music. So check out the links below and give it a try. See if you can listen to Elizabethan music for a day or two, and feel free to report back in the comments below about your experience. Next time up is English art, again during the Elizabethan period.